Well, good afternoon. My name is Jamie Haverl. I'm the Executive Director at the Iowa Healthy Estate Initiative. And we're thrilled to have all of you joining us here today. The Iowa Healthy Estate Initiative launched the Make It Okay campaign back in 2019, and we're thrilled to be partnering with MedQuarter as well as the Make It Okay Linn County committee on this webinar series. So I just have a couple of tips for you as we get started today regarding Zoom. All of the attendees' microphones will be muted to keep the background noise at a minimum. You can turn on your camera, as it's always great to see so many faces. There are a couple of ways that you can set up your Zoom screen. You can click on the gallery button on the top right-hand side where you can change your view to active speaker view or gallery view where you'll see everyone's face. If you have any questions, please use the chat function found at the bottom of your screen and we will use this to answer any of your questions. And also, we are recording today's session and we will make it available and send all of you a link to it so that you can share with others as well. So it is my privilege to turn it over to our wonderful moderator today, Carol Mead with Unity Point Health St. Luke's Hospital. So Carol, I'll let you take it over.
Thank you, Jamie. Much appreciated. Thanks for helping us with this event. So I want to welcome everybody also to our midweek series this week. And I'm going to start with just a few slides. As soon as I can get to my next slide. I'm going to get to a few slides just to kind of go over Make It Okay. And Jamie, I'm having trouble getting to my next slide. Oh, now I think it's coming. There we go. Okay, so I want to go over just a little bit about the Make It Okay campaign, as well as some resources, and then we'll get into our panel discussion. So Make It Okay is a community campaign to reduce stigma by increasing understanding and caring and creating caring conversations about mental illness. Oops, I thought I might have done that, sorry. The Make It Okay framework is really all around learn, talk, and share. So we will talk mostly today, we'll be learning about stigma with the hopes that moving forward, you'll be able to feel more comfortable talking and sharing with people in your lives. We're talking all about stigma today. And so I think it's important for us to talk about the definition of stigma. Stigma is a negative perception that causes someone to devalue or think less of the whole person. It's stereotyping or labeling a person because of their condition. In a recent public survey, it showed that most people thought mental illnesses were related to stress, lack of willpower, or weakness. This is really the baseline of stigma. And if we have a better understanding of what mental illness is, that's going to help us eliminate the stigma in our community. We're going to show a video now that was produced by Megan Rentz while she was a student with Iowa Big. Megan uses her talents in drama and production to help promote awareness of mental illness in youth.
You don't look depressed.
You have a family.
Get over yourself.
You have it so good. Why aren't you happy?
You're making me feel depressed.
Have you tried drinking tea?
There's nothing really
What is wrong with you?
Just snap out of it.
Why can't you just be normal?
You have it better than everybody else.
There are people that have gone through extremely far worse than what you've gone through.
Just cheer up.
Happiness is a
really
choice,
wrong.
you know.
What is wrong with you?
You have nothing to be upset about.
What is wrong?
Your problem?
You
You have a family.
Why aren't you happy?
You don't look depressed. Never think of anyone but yourself.
Why aren't you happy?
That's the thing about depression. You don't have to understand it to have it.
That video I always find so extremely powerful. And I know the target is youth, but when I watch that, I think most of us can relate to those feelings. And probably many of us have even felt something similar. And unfortunately, some of us may have even said something similar. So definitely powerful. And again, I want to thank Megan for her talents in sharing that. So this quote really stands out to me and is really impactful. You know, as youth, we're taught about illnesses like colds and broken bones and surgeries and kind of how to take care of those things. But mental illness is really rarely talked about or discussed. You know, the point of our Make It Okay campaign, and especially today's session, is that talking about mental illness really should be discussed just like any other condition, like diabetes, like heart disease, all of those other sort of normal illnesses that we talk about. Because the more we talk about it, the more comfortable we're going to be talking to our friends and family about situations that we may have or that they may be experiencing. Just a little bit more on why this matters. We know that stigma can be a barrier in seeking care. And so as a result, it can result in isolation, loss of job or income, dropping out of school, incarceration, and, you know, in extreme situations, unfortunately, it can result in suicide. It's always really important for us to touch on what, you know, so what should I say? What should I say if I am with someone who's struggling with a mental illness? You'll see there on the screen things not to say. It could be worse, snap out of it. We've all been there, pull yourself together. You know, all of those things that sometimes I think we may be thinking we're saying to help someone and help them move forward, but really can be harmful for someone who's experiencing a mental illness. So what should we say? And you can see the things written there. You know, for me, a lot of it's just about saying something that's kind, that's non-judgmental. And, you know, what would I be saying if someone was sharing with me about another diagnosis, be it cancer or diabetes or heart disease? It's really, again, going back to that quote, it should be looked at in the same way. You know, attending a session like this can sometimes trigger some of us with some feelings that we aren't expecting. So we like to share the National Suicide Hotline and the Foundation 2 Crisis Line, as well as other numbers that you can use to seek help if you're not sure where to turn. We also want to highlight some local resources in our community. These are just a few. Obviously, there's lots of agencies in our community that can help people who are experiencing a mental illness. And I also really like to highlight NAMI of Linn County. NAMI is an excellent resource for you if you're experiencing something in terms of mental illness, or if you have a family member. They're an excellent support and resource for individuals and families. So please consider visiting their website. And then without further ado, I want to move right into introducing our panelists. I know the reason you're all here is not to listen to me, but to listen to our experts who are here today. So I'll introduce them and then we'll get right into our discussion for today. So we're really excited to have these three panelists today. Starting with Andrew Beer. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist who's been employed at Tanager Place for 5 years. He received his doctorate from the University of Iowa and enjoys providing clinical services, teaching locally, and providing clinical supervision. Andrew is passionate about everything mental health, as well as helping others reach their full potential. And then I'd also like to introduce Ann Harris Carter. Ann is a community volunteer who has more than 25 years of experience in corporate leadership in the retail, banking, and energy sectors. A Yale graduate, she is especially passionate about diversity, equity and inclusion strategy, and community service. Anne has been taking medication for bipolar 2 since 2008 and is learning how to share her journey in a way that makes a difference for others. Natalie, or Tally Eggy, is a Kirkwood Community College student looking to pursue a degree in social work with an emphasis in substance abuse counseling. Her journey through treatment for substance abuse and experience with obsessive compulsive disorder has contributed to her passion in spreading mental health awareness. And you guys are all in for a treat as we go through our discussion today. So again, I want to welcome everybody. And since we're going to be talking about stigma today, I want to start by just reviewing that definition that we had at the beginning. It's a negative perception that causes someone to devalue or think less of the whole person. It's stereotyping or labeling a person because of their condition. So I want to start with Anne and Tally, and I wonder if you guys could share just a little bit about how stigma has impacted you personally. And I don't care who wants to go first. Anne, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Carol, and thanks to everyone who's joined this session today. As Carol mentioned, I've been taking medication for bipolar type 2 since 2008. So just by way of background, bipolar 2 disorder is defined by a pattern of depressive and hypomanic episodes. So it can look similar to depression, and then unfortunately, it can also be misdiagnosed as depression. That's significant because bipolar and depression require different treatment plans, and treating someone with bipolar with antidepressants can actually trigger mania. So not good. And my short answer to the question, how stigma has impacted me, would really be hiding. That's kind of been my key learning, hiding. I will tell you, the diagnosis came at a particularly difficult period in my life, professionally as well as personally. I had switched jobs. I had taken a job at a large Midwestern bank, and I had a fancy title. I was a senior vice president, but I had taken a huge pay cut, and I really missed the company where I'd spent most of my career. So it got to a point where not only was I having a hard time getting out of bed, but I had been weepy at work for months. And really for most of my adult life, I had attributed cyclical changes in mood to just a severe case of PMS, premenstrual syndrome, if you're familiar with that, which means every month I would have a period of feeling down, but I didn't think it was depression because eventually my mood would lift. But this cycle when I was at the bank was different, and I had to close my office door, and I was just crying. I couldn't stop the tears. I couldn't breathe, and was afraid that maybe I was having a nervous breakdown. So I called my sister-in-law, and to this day, I really don't even remember what she told me, other than she said she was calling her brother so that he could come pick me up and take me to urgent care. And within a few days, both the urgent care doctor and my primary care physician came to the same conclusion. And I began taking mood stabilizers for bipolar type 2. And because of stigma and related concerns, and I'm going to say real and perceived or real and imagined, I hid that diagnosis for nearly 10 years. I took my medication regularly. I saw a psychiatrist regularly, and I saw a therapist intermittently. But it took me years to realize how much energy I was using to hide my mental illness. I was hiding in every area of my life. At home, I mean, sure, certainly my husband at the time knew, my family knew, but it wasn't something that we talked about at the dinner table. I was hiding at work. I don't even remember when I told the first person at work. It was a long time. hiding at church. And at the time I was married to a pastor, and pastors' families don't have problems, right? So I got caught up in that. And then I was doing work in the community and very concerned about my reputation. And so using my energy to hide really over the years took a tremendous toll, physically as well as psychologically. I mean, it was really just exhausting. And so again, my one word answer to how the stigma impacted me was hiding.
Thank you, Anne. Tally, would you want to talk a little bit about how stigma has impacted you?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Anne, and thank you, everyone. So I am Tally, and I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, only a few years ago, but I've been having symptoms since I was pretty young. I was diagnosed when I was young with just generalized anxiety disorder, partially because they weren't sure, like, if I fit into a more specific category or if I was just experiencing anxiety. But I guess I felt a lot of stigma in my school environment with all the people around me. I felt like cast out, and I started to turn that back towards myself and like internalize that discrimination, I guess. I assumed I would be rejected, and so I didn't seek opportunities. I started to value myself less because I assumed people wouldn't value me because that is what I had seen through previous experiences or what I had perceived had gone on in previous experiences. And another part that was really hard was when I started using substances to cope, and that further made me feel separated from people at my school. I felt like people looked down on me for what I was doing and like blamed me for my addiction. And like I would have people tell me like, just quit, like just get over it. And it wasn't something I could just get over, but I didn't feel at the time like I could seek help. So yeah.
Thanks. Thank you both so much for sharing. Your personal stories are so important to us. And we know that stigma can be harmful. You've both shared that. It often leads people to feel ashamed of themselves or their family members about their mental illness. So Andrew, I guess I'd like to ask you next. What makes mental illness stigma so hard to change, and how does that impede people from getting help?
Well, as far as the slides kind of alluded to earlier, one of the potential solutions is being able to feel more comfortable with it as a society and being able to open up and talking about it. But unfortunately, due to stigma, it leads to quite the opposite. So I think the tendency for most people in this world is to avoid things that A, you don't understand, and B, make you feel different or make you perceive yourself to feel differently. And so that leads to less talking about it. It leads to people avoiding other people when they talk about it, it makes them feel uncomfortable. And it just leads to less people, because of all of that, it leads to less people being informed about available resources, or even knowing that they need to pursue mental health services in the first place. And so it's kind of a self-perpetuating cycle. If you don't talk about it, then you can't feel more comfortable with it, which makes you not want to talk about it more, things like that. As far as pursuing resources, I mean, for kids and teens wanting to feel like you are accepted, like you're one of the group, like you're just like all your other peers is probably the most significant thing that you can encounter. And one of if you have mental health problems or you're having mental health struggles, that's going to make you feel even more different than any of your peers. And so you're going to try to internalize that. You're going to try to avoid it. You're not going to want to talk about it because that's going to make you feel different. If you're an adult, adults have such stressful and busy lives. And if you don't think that mental health is that important, then you're not going to emphasize finding treatment or seeing a therapist or whatever. You're just going to avoid it until it gets really, really bad then. And then if you're an adult of a child who has mental health problems, our tendencies are we want to be the best parents that we possibly can. And if our kids have mental health struggles, I think the natural reaction sometimes is to feel like I'm a bad parent. And so I'm just going to sweep away the fact that they have mental health problems and attribute it to something else. Maybe it's their lack of, maybe something that's more individualized, like their lack of willfulness to be able to work through things, or they have behavioral problems that are not my fault. All of those things can contribute to both perpetuating the stigma and then lack of pursuit of the resources themselves.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, very informative. So my next question then is, just how else does stigma show up in our community? You know, I'm thinking about the different places where we always are, workplace, school, you know, medically in the medical world, and then also in the faith world. So, Anne, I wonder if I could start with you. Could you share a little bit about, you know, stigma in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have spent most of my career in the corporate sector and, you know, would say I've had by most standards a fair amount of success for what that's worth. Let me talk first personally in that work is where I faked it the most when I talk about hiding, because I absolutely perceived that disclosing my disorder would be a risk in terms of my career growth. And, you know, used to have to think about, you know, if I'd been crying, my eyes are red or swollen, you know, what am I going to do? And what if I need tissues? Do I take it to a meeting? Do I have pockets to put them in? Do I step out of the room? And so that might sound odd, but again, those are the things that I thought about and dealt with at work. And, you know, it really impacts, if you think about it, impacting relationships and productivity. And it's a blurry line because I know, Carol, you made the comparison earlier about what we say when we learn about some other illnesses, perhaps cancer or diabetes, I think you used as examples. And when I did start talking, and people mean well, but, you know, I would often, oh, that's private, or you don't have to tell me about that. And it is private. And I guess since I spent much of my career working on diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think it's really important to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because if you're not sure what to say, or you're afraid of saying the wrong thing, or you're afraid you're going to get in trouble, or gosh, I'm going to get sued, then people don't talk about these things. And so that's, you know, that I had my own personal stuff to deal with, but I also encountered that additional layer of stigma.
Thank you, Anne. I think some of what you said just highlights that the energy that you talked about too, you know, having to think about where to put your Kleenex in a meeting, that actually would have never even, it wouldn't have occurred to me. So thanks for sharing those details. That's really powerful. Tally, would you want to talk to us a little bit about how stigma shows up at school? You talked a little bit, but explain a little.
Yeah, it's hard for me not to talk about school because as a 17-year-old, I've spent most of my life in school. Well, I'm still in school. So I guess for me personally, it was really hard for me to get accommodations. I faced barriers with, not just with like the higher level like principal and stuff to get accommodations, but I faced difficulty with the teachers following through on applying them. I had teachers that would tell me, you can't have extra time on this test. I know it says that, but I'm not going to let you do that. And that was very hard for me because it gave me more anxiety to expect it and to have it not happen. I also found that I had to really learn how to make more time than there is time, because I would do things like rewrite my notes over and over again until they felt perfect in my eyes. And I would spend so much time on one assignment that it would be 2 a.m. and I would still have like 3 more assignments to do that were all due the next day. And when I tried to explain that to teachers the next day, they never tried to understand where I was coming from. They just told me, just write it once and get over it, I guess. And so that was difficult for me as well.
Thanks, Tally. Every time you tell me you're 17, I just never believe it. So thank you. Thank you for having the courage to talk today. Andrew, would you want to share a little bit about how stigma shows up in our medical community, or that community?
Absolutely. And my initial reaction is that I think people talk about, so stigma ends up resulting in people talking about mental health in terms of things that they actually understand. And what ends up happening is when people present as patients in the medical community, they talk about what they're experiencing from a purely physical standpoint. And what happens when you describe your symptoms from a strictly physical standpoint is then you end up more often than not getting treatments that are designed to treat the physical symptoms that you're feeling, which what we know about mental health is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. And as I talk about things just being self-perpetuating, then is most things that we associate with medication are sicknesses and illnesses, which oftentimes leads to feeling kind of different or broken, which is I saw somebody in the chat use the word shame, and I think that's a wonderful word to throw out there. Is when you feel sick, when you feel broken, when you feel different, you feel a lot of shame surrounding that. And so, I mean, that isn't the intention in the medical community, but I think that's a realistic thing that happens based on the stigma that we unintentionally see in the medical community.
Thank you. I'm going to circle back to Tally real quick because she tells me she's got one more thing she wants to say before I go back to Anne, who's going to talk to us about the faith community.
Thank you for your willingness to
Of course.
one more time. Another thing that I think is particularly difficult with stigma in school is some people with mental health disorders tend have physical symptoms that come up because of their mental health disorders. That was something that I experienced, and I ended up missing a third of my classes my sophomore year. And that was one of the reasons I chose to do my junior year completely online and graduate early, which worked out well because of COVID, convenient. But I think that having the option to have good online education was very helpful for me in being able to learn the information that I needed to. And not go into the nurse's office anymore and hear them say, "You're here again. You're not even sick. Like, go back to class." And so.
Excellent. Thanks, Tally. That's really, really important. And I think one of the things that we know is the more we can integrate medical needs with mental health needs, the better off we're going to be. I want to ask Anne also about, how does stigma show up in the faith community? You mentioned earlier that that's an important part of your life. So what's your experience from that aspect?
Yeah. And, I was a pastor's wife for 27 years, and I am divorced now, but my faith has remained very important in my life. And it really was not until I came back to Cedar Rapids and kind of became involved with the ministry here, where I shared my story, actually did a video, and that I felt more supported than I would have expected. And by my sharing, one by one, people would come up and share with me what they were dealing with. And people are certainly entitled to their privacy. Some people overshare, and nobody needs to know everything. But the stigma in the faith community tends to be, well, it's either a character flaw, or it's an indication of how strong or weak your faith is, and not recognizing that mental illness is a medical condition. So whereas when somebody presents with, I'm going to use again the cancer, diabetes, and you go to the altar for prayer, that's sort of expected, but it can be really intimidating to go to the altar to say, I'm depressed, or I don't know what's happening, because you start to ask questions like, well, why is God, again, the character flaw, why isn't God healing you? Or like Telly said, just get over it. What's wrong with you? The joy of the Lord is your strength. And trust me, I am a person of, I believe in prayer and love the scriptures. And part of my own journey was learning, well, what does healing mean for me in God's eyes? And understanding, and I think somebody put in the chat, Brene Brown, but how did God create me? And people are not perfect. I've thought maybe for many years I should be perfect, but sorry, that's a joke. But people are not perfect. And so for the faith community to get beyond that stigma that, if you're ill, or if you, particularly mental illness, something's wrong with you and you're not trusting God, that's not what the life of faith is about. It took me a long time to start to get my arms around that.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Anne. I think it is a journey, and I think that's okay that we all come to it on our own. The title of our session today is to stop the silence and stop the stigma. And one of the things I really liked about what you said there was that once you started talking, other people kind of started talking too. And I think that's the challenge that we have. So we know that stigma and silence are closely connected, and we know that there are healthy and unhealthy ways of coping. And some of that's been touched on, but I think my next question would be, what are some risks of coping with mental illness in silence? So kind of continuing on that silence aspect. And Andrew, would you want to start us off by maybe talking about some unsafe behaviors or unsafe coping strategies?
Absolutely. So mental health has the tendency to make our body or provide urges in our body that are actually the opposite of what we need in those situations. And so, for example, one urge that people with anxiety often have is to avoid, and people who are suffering from depression, the urge is to isolate. And a lot of times that is the complete opposite of what they need in those situations. And especially because as human beings, we're socially embedded. We're designed to be socially embedded, whether we're introverts or extroverts. Like the people around us are what make us different from a lot of different creatures, and the support that they can provide. And when we suffer in silence, we're taking ourselves away from probably the most natural resource we have for our mental health, which is connections, feeling supported by our social environment, things like that. And so when we're cut off from things like that, then we have to find other ways to self-soothe or to take care of ourselves. And if we can't find healthy ways to do that, then we often lead ourselves to things that work, but they're unhealthy. And some really good examples of that, some of that self-medicating include like substance abuse and self-harm. Like that stuff works, but it's not healthy for you by any sense of the imagination. And when we suffer in silence because of that stuff, then we end up kind of getting addicted to that stuff. And then we don't have our natural resources to help us get out of that either. And so we can just continue that cycle of, well, I try doing something that might be healthy, it doesn't work, and I'll go back to what I know. I'll go back to what has worked for me in the past, even if it's not healthy for myself.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Andrew. Anne or Tally, would one of you guys want to share about some risks or some coping that you've experienced?
I'll give Anne a break from going first. So I think that what Andrew said about self-medicating really rings true with me, because that was something that I experienced in my own life and saw in the people that I used to hang around. And especially being around people who were also like using substances, it made it harder for me to seek help, because I would talk about stopping and I would hear them say, like, tell me that I don't have a problem and that it's not a problem. And even though I knew it was, and I wanted to stop, but I needed help. And when I made the decision to stop and distance myself from those people, my life really changed for the better, I feel. I've developed a lot healthier coping mechanisms, and I feel a lot like better in my everyday life. I think that there are a lot of healthy coping mechanisms that people can use, and the risks of struggling in silence are enormous.
Thank you, Tally. Anne, how about you? What are some of your thoughts on the risks of coping in silence?
Yeah, I'll just I'll be brief. I mean, because the isolation and just, you know, trying to escape from others, it really is it has been amazing to me what a difference it makes when I bring in a support group of family or friends or colleagues to talk to, as opposed to shutting my office door and bury myself, or going to work late, or whatever, you know, whatever. The other element that I think it stayed silent is hearing from others. Oh, sure, I know what that's like. I wake up early or only get 3 hours of sleep, you know, all the time. Or, you know, well, you just need to exercise, or you should just do this, or you should do that, or you should do the other thing. And it's just not helpful. And for me, it's not only creates the inferiority complex, but just causes me to retreat that much more.
Thanks for that. I think hearing your personal stories has been incredibly eye-opening for me personally. Kind of moving into shifting gears just a little bit, Andrew, I'm wondering if you could help us understand what trauma-informed care means and why those interventions might vary based on an individual basis and how that might be helpful.
Absolutely. And I'll try to do it justice in a couple minutes. It could probably be its own webinar series by itself. So basically, trauma-informed care conceptualizes people's well-being from the idea that trauma affects so many people in this world, and it affects them in, or it exists in very small ways. It affects them in it exists in very large ways. And because of just the varying degrees that people can experience trauma and how they manifest the symptoms of that trauma, it provides kind of this blanket concept of this is the approach that we should utilize to work with people that have or have potentially experienced trauma. And it's super important that something like trauma-informed care exists, because a lot of times, and this is especially true with kids and teenagers, that the symptoms that kids who have experienced trauma exhibit are often responded to by adults in ways that are actually the exact opposite of what is helpful in that situation. So it's very much a guiding principle of saying, like, I think a lot of times a really good example is teenagers who exhibit defiance on a daily or weekly basis. An adult response to that typically is to, like, well, they need more discipline, they need to be yelled at, they need to be held accountable. And not in every situation is that going to be true. And more often than not, some of those things or some of those concepts that we're going to use as adults are going to just make things worse and aren't going to be helpful whatsoever. And so it provides this these guiding ideas on just how to basically work with people who have experienced trauma. And so I guess the second part of that question is, so it then results in there are just numerous different types of interventions for the individual. And that's because trauma is so, I mean, this is mental health in general too, that mental health and trauma are so individualized. It's not like medicine where it's like you have these symptoms, which matches up with this form of treatment. There's some general principles that work like that, but pretty much mental health is tailored to the individual. And because of that, you're going to get very individualized practices. When I work with my clients, I offer a variety of things as far as skills that they can learn or ways to look at things. And I let them know ahead of time that it's impossible for me to know exactly what you're going through, because you are an individual and you're different than anybody I've ever seen. And so my goal for you is to hopefully, out of everything that I give you, maybe a few things will work. I don't expect everything to work. And so that basically encompasses the idea that we're all so different as individuals, which is the basic idea of trauma-informed care.
Thanks for that, Andrew. I think that really highlights the fact that while we know that mental illness is an illness like many other things, unlike some other things where you can, my thyroid's not working correctly, they can do some blood work and here's your prescription. That the idea with mental illness is that treatment can be very individualized and needs to be individualized, right? So kind of moving on then, we noted earlier that stereotypes and words we use influence perceptions of people with mental illness. And sometimes we even hesitate to say the word mental illness. So Andrew, what are your thoughts on how other terms such as emotional health or emotional wellness influence our perceptions about people with mental illness?
Yeah, I love hearing terms like this, because I think the tendency or the purpose of these words is it helps to generalize the importance of mental health, not only to the people who are suffering from the worst forms of it, but to everybody in general. My personal philosophy is I think we all struggle with some forms of mental health to varying degrees, and it looks very, very different for each and every person. I think anxiety is a really good example of that. I think probably most of us have some forms of anxiety. It may not be crippling, it may not provide dysfunction in our daily lives, but I think if people knew more about anxiety, that they would realize, oh, like, yeah, this is something that I do have. And actually, sometimes it's an adaptive function that helps me to succeed in my daily life. But terms like this, basically, I think they make it more acceptable as far as like I mean, when we use the word illness, the tendency is to mental illness specifically. We think of it as kind of a negative connotation, but when we think of it as emotional health or emotional wellness, my natural reaction is to go to kind of like physical health and physical wellness. And when people hear those terms, they're like, oh, well, I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to go to the gym. One big thing in mental health right now is something called mindfulness. And I read an article that talked about how in 10 or 15 years, people are going to be practicing mindfulness just like they practice going to the gym. It's going to be like practicing, like working out a muscle. And I hope that more terms like this can come out that can generalize mental health to be something that we all take care of ourselves for, and not look at it as like when we're significantly impacted by it, that's when we need to see it, as opposed to like a preventative thing, like what can I do for my mental health and mental well-being?
Thank you for that. And I hope that you're correct. I think as, you know, we continue to reduce the stigma, some of those wellness opportunities, hopefully all of us will take advantage of on a more regular basis. And as we normalize things, that should certainly be the case. You know, we're getting towards the end of our hour together, so I want to make sure that people know if you have specific questions for any of our speakers, feel free to throw those in there and we'll try to answer them if we have time. If not, we'll answer them later for you. I want to take the time now to make sure that you all know about our third session of the Make It Okay midweek series that will be happening November 18th. That topic is going to be medical and spiritual first aid. And our panelists are going to be talking more about recognizing when someone needs help and our role in helping them get connected. So I'm really excited about that session in November. So please look for that information and register when it comes to your inbox. I want to take give all of our panelists another opportunity to kind of share your closing thoughts on the topic that we have today in terms of stopping the silence, stopping the stigma. So I'd like you all to just kind of, give us wrap up your thoughts for today and takeaways that our entire group can have. I feel like Anne and Tally have gone first a few times, so I think I'm going to go to Andrew to go first today.
Absolutely. Well, I think to change things on a greater level, we have to change the process. And so if we want to overcome stigma and we want to empower people to take care of themselves from a mental health perspective, it starts with things like this. It starts with being able to talk about things. And so what we can do, and I think about this in terms of a lot of concepts in life, is like, what can I do as an individual? I can't change the whole world, but what can I do as an individual? And I think from some of the things that we talked about today is being able to give other people space, being able to validate people when they express things from a mental health perspective, and try not to shut them off or give them signals that they probably are already thinking about themselves as feeling self-conscious or feeling shame about things like that. And then if we as individuals are struggling with our mental health too, being willing to talk about that with other people to a healthy degree. We don't want to be oversharers in our life ever, but we want to be able to feel comfortable sharing things in our life that can have an impact on other people. And so, thinking about what can I do or what can we do to help improve mental health in this world, I think those are some simple things that we can all do.
Thank you, Andrew. I agree. Tally or Anne, either one of you want to volunteer to be second? Tally, you want to go?
Sure. Oh, I just realized I didn't mute myself last time. Whoops. Oh my gosh. Anyway, I just wanted to stress the importance of education and educating yourself on the risks of stigma, what stigma is, and educating yourself on what mental illness is and the importance of just education. I think that is something that I find very important, because you can't do what you don't know, I guess. And I did want to thank Mo from NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness in Linn County. I met her, she's the executive director, through Active Minds at Kirkwood. when we were working together to help college students with mental health. And I just wanted to thank her for helping me get to know you guys and get to where I can help talk about this and use my voice to say the things that I think are important. So thank you.
Thank you, Tally. And I agree. Linn County NAMI is a great organization, and Mo's a good leader there. So you're in good hands with her. Anne, how about your closing thoughts?
Yeah. What's really important to me in this is making it easy for people to self-identify and making it easy for people to get help. And, you know, I think, Tally, as you've shared, and we keep repeating your age. So you're a few years younger than I am. I was in my 40s when I was diagnosed. And that's the way it is. I mean, I don't have regrets, but what does it take? You know, when I finally started opening up and people would say, oh, I would never have known, you know, you seem so normal, you know, you seem like you have it all together, meaning to compliment me, but somehow that didn't make me feel better. And so sometimes people use that expression, it's okay not to be okay. We've talked about normalizing things, and that's really where I want us to get as a society, that we talk about, you know, calling the employee assistance program at work, or seeing our counselor, or spending extra time, you know, whatever. The way we talk about stubbing our toe, or breaking a bone, or, you know, getting stitches. I mean, I don't know what the analogies are, but just, it really is okay. And whatever that spectrum is, you know, just to make it easy for people to self-identify, make it easy for people to get help.
Thank you, Anne. And thank you, Andrew and Tally as well. I really admire your courage in sharing your stories today. And Andrew, really enjoyed your perspective as a mental health professional. Before we close today, I want to just let everybody know about ambassador trainings that will be happening in November. You'll be getting a follow-up email from the Healthiest State Initiative that will give you some information, but the ambassador trainings are so important and really great. I've personally gone through them. If you choose to become an ambassador, then you will have some information where you can do that, learn, speak, share information with your coworkers and your friends and families. And so I encourage you, if you find that this has been interesting and you share that passion, to sign up for one of those ambassador trainings, because the more people we have who can share the information about making it okay, the better it's going to be for our community and the state. So I encourage you to do that. And there will be more information about the ambassador trainings in an email that you'll be receiving soon. I think that we are going to, that comes to the end of our session today. You know, I want to remind you all of the resources that we shared, and you know, take the opportunity to reach out for some assistance. If you personally need some assistance, there's support here in the community, and you know, we just want to keep working on making it okay and sharing about our concerns. So thank you everybody for joining us today.